There is a person in your life, perhaps someone you once trusted completely, whose words felt like medicine, and whose presence felt like shelter. And yet somehow, you always left their company feeling smaller than when you arrived. You told yourself it was your imagination. You questioned your own perception. You apologized for things you did not do. And the most unsettling part? That person never raised their voice. They never made an obvious threat. They simply spoke. Calmly, convincingly, with an almost supernatural ability to make you doubt everything except them. This is not coincidence. This is not charm. This is architecture. What you experienced was a carefully constructed psychological system, one that most people never detect because it does not look like manipulation. It looks like honesty. It looks like concern. It looks, in many cases, like love. Today, we are going to dismantle that architecture piece by piece, because once you understand why toxic people are so convincing, you will never be deceived by them in the same way again. Most people move through their entire lives operating on a fundamental assumption that what they perceive is what is real, that when something feels true, it probably is, that the emotional signals inside them, the comfort, the trust, the doubt, are accurate messengers of objective reality. This assumption is the vulnerability that certain individuals have learned, consciously or not, to exploit with extraordinary precision. We live in a world where we have been taught to trust sincerity over strategy. We have been conditioned to believe that kindness is kindness, that concern is concern, and that a person who speaks with confidence must have earned that confidence through truth. These are not foolish beliefs. They are, in most human relationships, entirely reasonable. But beneath the surface of ordinary social interaction, there exist deeper psychological forces at work. Forces that have nothing to do with logic and everything to do with identity, attachment, and the ancient architecture of the human nervous system. The truth is that your brain does not evaluate relationships the way a scientist evaluates data. It evaluates them the way a child evaluates safety, through feeling, through pattern recognition, through the emotional residue left by repeated experience. And this means that a person who knows how to generate the feeling of safety, of importance, of being uniquely understood, has already bypassed your most sophisticated defenses before a single rational thought has formed. What you never learned in school, what almost no one teaches, is that the most dangerous forms of influence do not announce themselves. They arrive dressed as connection. Here's the first thing you must understand. Toxic people are not convincing because they are smarter than you. They are convincing because they have learned, through years of unconscious or deliberate practice, to speak directly to the parts of you that were never taught to defend themselves. Every human being carries within them what psychologists sometimes call attachment wounds, places of early emotional experience where the need for love, approval, or safety was not fully met. These are not weaknesses. They are simply the inevitable marks left by being human. But they are also doorways. The individual who grows up feeling unseen learns to hunger for validation. The person who was raised in an environment of conditional love learns to interpret earned affection as the highest form of intimacy. The one who was taught that conflict equals danger learns to read aggression as power and submission as love. A toxic person, whether consciously or through pure instinct, does not attack these wounds. They offer to heal them. They mirror your values back to you with uncanny precision. They make you feel, in the early stages of contact, as though you have finally been truly known, as though a person has looked into the deepest part of you and approved of what they found there. This experience is profoundly disorienting in the best possible way. It generates a biochemical response in the brain, virtually indistinguishable from the early stages of love. And once that bond has been formed, once the nervous system has registered this person is safe, this person sees me, the rational mind becomes, in many ways, secondary. You are no longer evaluating their behavior. You are defending the identity they helped you construct. This is not weakness. This is the human condition encountered in its most vulnerable form. 5 centuries ago, a Florentine diplomat named Niccolò Machiavelli sat in enforced exile and wrote one of the most controversial texts in the history of human thought. The prince was not, as many have assumed, a celebration of cruelty. It was something more disturbing, an unflinching observation of how power actually moves through the world, independent of moral wishes about how it should. Machiavelli had watched rulers rise and fall. He had seen brilliant men destroyed not by inferior enemies but by their own illusions, their insistence on seeing human nature as it ought to be rather than as it is. And from this observation, he distilled a principle that remains as relevant now as it was in Renaissance Florence. He wrote that it is better to be feared than loved, if one cannot be both. But he also understood something subtler, something that modern psychology has only recently begun to quantify. He recognized that the most effective form of control is not coercion. It is the art of making others want to serve your interests while believing they are serving their own. A true prince, in Machiavelli's vision, does not need to be virtuous. He needs only to appear virtuous. He must know how to be a lion when strength is required, but also how to be a fox, cunning enough to recognize traps and wise enough never to spring them through. Openness. When we hold this lens up to the psychology of the toxic individual, the portrait becomes startlingly clear. The toxic person is, in many ways, a natural Machiavellian, not because they have read philosophy, but because they have evolved a survival strategy that operates on identical principles. They do not conquer through force. They conquer through image, through strategic vulnerability, through the careful construction of a reality in which they are always the protagonist and you are always in some quiet and unspoken way in their debt. To truly understand why this strategy works, we must look honestly at how the human mind processes social information and why it was never designed to be manipulation-proof. The subconscious mind does not think in words. It thinks in patterns and emotional frequencies, in the accumulated residue of experience repeated enough times to become prediction. Long before your conscious awareness forms a complete sentence about a person, your nervous system has already rendered a verdict, and that verdict is based almost entirely on how that person makes you feel in their presence. Toxic individuals instinctively understand this, even when they could not articulate it. They do not target your logic. They target your nervous system. They do this through a series of psychological mechanisms that are now well documented, even if rarely named in ordinary conversation. The first is intermittent reinforcement, the alternating pattern of warmth and withdrawal that creates in the recipient an almost addictive need for the next moment of approval. This is the same neurological mechanism underlying gambling behavior. The unpredictability of reward does not diminish desire. It amplifies it to an almost irrational intensity. The second is identity mirroring, the early stage behavior in which the toxic individual reflects your values, your interests, your sense of humor, your worldview back to you with such accuracy that you experience them not as a separate person, but as a rare and precious recognition of yourself. The third is the slow normalization of distorted reality, the gradual, almost imperceptible process through which your standards for acceptable behavior are revised downward, one small exception at a time, until things that would once have alarmed you now feel ordinary. These mechanisms do not require malice. Many toxic individuals have no conscious awareness of what they are doing. They are simply running deeply encoded patterns, learned strategies of survival that once protected them and now, in your life, consume everything they touch. Here is the revelation that changes everything. Toxic people are convincing not because they are powerful. They are convincing because they have learned to become mirrors. And mirrors, by their very nature, always show you something you recognize. When a toxic person enters your life and tells you that you are extraordinary, that you are misunderstood by everyone else, that they alone truly see your value, they are not describing you. They are constructing a version of you that serves their purpose and offering it to you as a gift. And we accept this gift with devastating gratitude, because deep within almost every human being lives a version of themselves that has spent years waiting to be seen in exactly this way. The moment you accept that constructed identity, a transaction has taken place that you were never fully informed about. You have, in exchange for the feeling of being known, handed that person the key to your self-perception. From that moment forward, they hold something extraordinarily powerful: the ability to grant or withdraw the very sense of self they helped you build. This is why leaving toxic relationships is not simply a matter of recognizing unhealthy behavior and walking away. The behavior, by the time it becomes undeniable, has long since become entangled with your sense of who you are. To leave feels not merely like ending a relationship, it feels like losing yourself. And this precise psychological architecture is the hidden mechanism that makes toxic people so devastatingly convincing. They are not selling you a lie about themselves. They are selling you a lie about you. And nothing in the human experience is harder to see clearly than the story you have been told about your own reflection. Understanding this architecture is not merely an intellectual exercise. It is the first act of genuine self-reclamation, and it can be practiced deliberately, patiently, and with profound effect. The beginning of that practice is not confrontation. It is observation. Begin to notice with genuine scientific curiosity and no self-judgment how you feel in the aftermath of interactions with specific people. Not during. The nervous system, in the presence of a skilled manipulator, will often register calm, but after. In the quiet hour following a conversation that seemed normal, in the subtle heaviness that settles when you replay an exchange that, on the surface, you cannot quite identify as wrong. The body knows things the conscious mind has not yet processed. Trust the signal even before you understand the source. From this foundation of quiet self-observation, begin the practice of separating your identity from external validation. This is deep work, the kind that meditation, journaling, and sometimes skilled therapeutic guidance can support. At its core, it involves learning to locate your sense of worth in something that no individual human being can give or remove: the stable, continuous experience of your own consciousness, your own values, your own sustained presence to yourself. When your self-perception is no longer a gift that can be withheld, the leverage that a toxic person holds over you dissolves at its root. You become, as a practical matter, unconvincible by the very mechanisms that once captured you. This is not coldness. This is not armoring yourself against connection. It is precisely the opposite. It is building within yourself a foundation stable enough to allow genuine intimacy, because you are no longer desperate enough to mistake performance for presence. Learn to ask, not with suspicion but with honest curiosity: does this person's behavior remain consistent when there is nothing to be gained? Does their warmth persist in the absence of your compliance? These questions, asked quietly and regularly, are among the most protective tools available to the conscious mind. Machiavelli understood that the world is not governed by the rules written in moral philosophy. It is governed by the principles written in human nature. And human nature, in its unguarded form, is exquisitely responsive to those who learn to speak its hidden language. But here is what Machiavelli could not have fully anticipated: the individual who turns that same penetrating gaze upon themselves, who learns the architecture of their own vulnerabilities with the same unflinching honesty, becomes something that no strategic mind can fully account for. You cannot convince a person who no longer needs what you are pretending to offer. The most powerful defense against manipulation is not cynicism, and it is not distance. It is the rare and difficult achievement of knowing yourself so clearly, so honestly, and so completely that the constructed mirrors others offer you simply cannot compete with the reality of your own unmediated self-perception. Toxic people are convincing because most of us have never been taught to look that deeply inward. But the capacity is there, in every human being who is willing to do the work. And the moment you begin that work in earnest, the world does not become darker. It becomes, for the first time, entirely your own.